y'all, I want to talk a little bit more about your argument essay. So today we're going to talk about characteristics of argument. And so basically, you've already seen this if you've looked at my little video about outlining basically your essay assignment. I want to talk about those things in a little bit more detail, and then there are a couple things in here that I still am going to talk about more. So I'll explain that to you when we get started. So let's just get started. Okay, so the first thing that you're going to start with is your issue. And so if you've looked at the forbidden topics, you may have seen that some of the things that maybe you wanted to talk about, you can't talk about anymore. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to show you how I broke down kind of a bigger issue into something that I thought you could talk about. So what I said is you need to focus on something narrowed. And so what I decided to do was I was going to look at a huge issue like climate change. I don't think you should talk about that because I just think it's so huge that you're never going to be able to say enough about it to really prove a point. So what I decided to do was I decided to think about things that exist inside climate change that could really help you pick a topic and that I know you could write about. So I was thinking climate change. You could talk about the Green New Deal if you wanted to. Everybody's talking about that right now. The Paris Climate Agreement, which the United States actually withdrew from a couple years ago, and I think it almost goes into effect almost right now. So that's kind of interesting. Renewable energy, and if I were going to do it, I would only pick one. So I wouldn't talk about wind, solar, and hydroelectric. I might talk about how wind power was either the wave of the future or it's terrible. You can talk about recycling. You can talk about fracking, which is another kind of big issue right now. So those are things that basically I have narrowed climate change into these smaller issues here. And so that's kind of what I want you to do with your paper. So that means you really can still write about what you want to. You just have to think about it a little bit more. Okay, so now your claim is basically your opinion. I want it to be educated, and I want it to be based on research. It should have two arguable sides, and like we talked about, I was thinking about anorexia. Anorexia is bad, okay, but how can it be good? So there's not really an arguable side to that. And so I also, since it is your opinion, students often ask me, so do I say I think fracking is bad? No, that's not really great. And if you're going to do that, just say fracking is bad. You don't need to say I think. Okay? And so what I did here was I went ahead and looked at the Paris Climate Agreement. And so here's a sample thesis that I used. Because of its ineffectiveness and lack of a binding enforcement mechanism, the United States should not enter back into the Paris Climate Agreement. And you may say, well, that's kind of an interesting, that sounds really hard to talk about. But honestly, what I did to find this was I went on Wikipedia and I looked at the criticism that people had for the Paris Climate Agreement. And I'm not saying I don't think you should necessarily use Wikipedia to find that, but I'm saying this isn't as hard as this sounds. And so, and let me tell you something else. Another thought that I had about this is I see how my paper is going to be organized pretty much. So I'm going to talk about how ineffective it is. And then I'm going to talk about the binding enforcement mechanism, which basically means there's no way to enforce anything in that agreement. And so I know that those are going to be basically my two main arguments there. Okay? And so anyway, so what I decided to do here was just kind of break this down for you. So the issue is the Paris Climate Agreement, and the claim is that they should not enter back into it. And so that would be your argument or opinion. Notice that I don't say I think. You don't need to say I think there. Okay? See, it feels easy, right? Yikes. Yeah, it's kind of easy. I don't know. So you're going to use different kinds of evidence. We're going to talk a little bit more about what good evidence will look like as we move on through the essay. I just don't want to overwhelm you. But so for right now, what I want you to do is I want you to have 3 scholarly sources. That means no Google, no Google, no Google. I want you to use the library sources. I am pretty much free reign that you can use just about anything inside the library databases. So I would take advantage of that because I wouldn't do something like that in 112. And then I do want every source to have an author. I know, I'm a little bit uptight about that, but sometimes I feel like you can get some kind of random stuff with no author. But if you do have something and you're like, this looks like a really good source, I got it from the database, but it doesn't have an author, talk to me and maybe we can figure out how to work that one, okay? Okay, and so I think the 2 best sources that you can use for this essay are opposing viewpoints, which we talked a little bit about in the works cited activity, and I'm going to talk about more later, and NC Live. I actually even think opposing viewpoints might be the best because it takes all these millions of issues and it shows you what people are saying about them on both sides. And you can use those things. So I think that's a really, really great place, at least to get started. You might find that you find better sources on NC Live, but this is a great starting spot. Opposing viewpoints is a great starting spot. Oh, excuse me. Now, I'm going to have a whole lesson about organization, but I just want to talk about some things that are going to go into your paper no matter how you write it. So if you write an active paper, basically what that means is you're going to have your introduction paragraph. Then I want you to talk about the history of the issue. And then I want you to talk about your points. So if I were doing this on that Paris Climate Agreement paper, I would introduce, obviously, and my thesis would be at the end of that introduction. Then I would give a background history of it and talk about how the United States had withdrawn from it. And then probably my reasons would be, reason A would be its ineffectiveness. Reason B would be its lack of binding mechanism. And then I would probably go on to a refutation. So I may not even have three body paragraphs that were reasons. I might only have two. And then you would have your conclusion. So that's an active paper. You're driving it, and here are your reasons, and then your refutation is at the end. Now, if you go to a reactive paper, then basically what you're doing is you're reacting to what people are saying about this. And I wouldn't stress out too much about it, but right now, because we'll talk about it more, but like you're looking at opposing viewpoints, and each of your reasons will be an opposing viewpoint. And the way you're going to form your argument will be to refute, what people are saying about it. So it's just, we'll talk about this a whole lot more. So, and I'll give you some examples of this one. Okay. So if you noticed in both of those papers, you do have to refute. And the reason I want you to refute, and it's more than just refute, I want you to acknowledge, accommodate, and refute the views of your paper. And so you have to know that whenever you have an opinion, there are other opinions out there. And I want you to really consider them, and that's what I mean by accommodate. I want you to really consider what people are saying, because when I think you make a thoughtful point when you really are seeing what other people are saying. And that keeps your paper from being biased. Okay? And so here's one that I cannot stress enough. Your tone. It needs to be professional and it needs to be informed. People sometimes, they love this paper because they say, I love to argue. Well, no, that's not really what I want you to do in this paper. I want you to have information to back up your point. So if you're just snarky commenting at somebody, that's, I don't know, that's almost biting to me. It's not really arguing. And so that's why I say I do not want insults. Doesn't get us anywhere. Generalizations, don't stereotype people or situations. I want you to be more thoughtful than that. Heated language. Oh my gosh. Facebook. You know, when people argue on Facebook, it's ridiculous. Nobody gets anywhere and they just insult each other and friendships are ruined. Whenever they don't need to be. So I would say, like, heated language just does not have a place here. I want educated language. And then I also do not want first-person pronouns, so I never want you to say I think, but I also don't want second-person pronouns where you say you, your, yous. Y'all, I think this whole paper should be in third person. He, she, they, it, them, they. That's how I want you to do this paper. Okay? And remember, the point is to prove your point using research. Okay? And you'll have your citations. So I'm going to ask you to quote, summarize, or paraphrase all three of your sources. You need to cite them with in-text citation, which you should be working on really soon, and then have a works cited entry. Anytime with that, I can help you. And the great thing about it is you're probably going to be using the databases mostly, and they do most of the works cited citation for you. Okay? And then this stuff is at the bottom of your essay. So I ordered things I thought in basically in terms of, or in order of importance. So I do think your essay, your grammar, your usage, the way you develop main points, transitions, conclusions, these are all really important things and you cannot have a paper without them. But I'm looking more at how you find your research, that you use your research, that you come up with like an educated issue and claim. And this stuff is a little bit less important. But if you destroy these things, you cannot make a good paper. That's what I always say. Grammar is not that important if you have one or two mistakes. But when your paper is not readable because grammar problems, then you've got way bigger issues. Okay? Okay. And so I think that's it for now. Really, I think really it's time to kind of start thinking about this. If you have any questions, please let me know. Bye, y'all.